All right, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing time so far. Our next speaker is Timothy Rohrbaugh. He is the CISO at JetBlue Airways. Please join me in welcoming him to our virtual stage.
Thank you for having me here. One of the things that I wanted to do was go over specifically for you how we apply ML or modern AI in cybersecurity. But before I do that, I want to just first admit right up front, I am not the one to come to answers on machine learning. In fact, modern AI is something that I don't have a lot of experience in with respect to anything other than applying it inside of the products. I do have experience with traditional AI, going back to knowledge-based systems and what was considered kind of a central product, Ginsum G2. But that aside, there are some ways that you can actually look to have interaction with the product vendors to have a better understanding about how it would benefit you. So I'm going to go into a couple aspects that I think are fairly high level, but I think are important if you're going to actually understand how it benefits you. So why do we need the power of modern artificial intelligence? And it's always good to qualify all of these acronyms, because even when I think about AI, I think about it from a standpoint of augmented intelligence, and I'll get into why that's important in just a bit. So the first thing is we have to understand that whatever problem that you have, especially in cybersecurity and others, that we do need help, right? We need help for very specific reasons, and it has to do with our own limitations. So our limitations you can be thought of, and I'm taking this from, I'll show you a slide in just a second where this comes from, but you can be thought of in like 4 different main areas or questions. So these are limitations called cognitive biases that we have. First one is, what should we remember? Then too much information, not enough meaning, and need to act fast. These are kind of the drivers which then lead into cognitive biases. Those cognitive biases are best seen, I think, in this cognitive bias Codex. It was developed in 2016, and you can see the link underneath of it. There's actually some adaptations of this where people have actually gone through, taken this graph, and then listed out exactly what some of these cognitive biases mean. Some of the ones that you probably know of is like recency bias, and that is where you're more biased to actually deciding that the answer is correct based on just seeing recent data and not taking into account all of the history of the data that may have an impact in how you view it. So the question is, with all of these biases, is there some aspect of this that we can surface to actually address in cybersecurity with respect to the products that we use? So we have 3 problems that cybersecurity analysts struggle with, right? We are limited in how fast we can process information and react. The speed to reaction is key many times, especially against automated attacks. Then there's too much evidence, meaning think of it from all the logging systems that you have, whether it's application, network, and we don't have the ability to filter and the capacity to process it. Cognitive biases are actually extremely important for us with respect to how we actually evolved, right? But in the modern world, all of a sudden we're faced with problems that we actually haven't had experience with. We haven't had time to adapt. So that adaptation, or without that adaptation, then we're faced with large amounts of data, for instance, and for us to actually draw conclusions from it gets very complicated, and it goes beyond human capacity. And so we need help doing that. That's where we get into the concept of augmented intelligence. But the third problem, we know what we know, and that is we tend to look for things based on what we know, not necessarily what's going to be important or predictive that we don't know. And then from the standpoint of the problems specifically in cybersecurity, right? Identifying the things that you need to do where you can find it's applicable is identify the limitations that exist in cybersecurity that are well matched for ANI. This is just a form of artificial intelligence that is directly, or it's a stage that's directly applicable to a single problem. Think of it that way. Not the panacea or the aspirational view of AI as, full broad human intelligence, just with respect to a problem. And then use the concept of augmented intelligence as the basis for problem identification. So when you think about the analyst, always come from the point of view of the analyst. The analyst's job listed out. You know that it's around detection. You know that it's around finding potentially anomalies or differences in the way that certain devices or networks or applications function. And those are the ones that we want to actually look for, the products that we use to have ML embedded, and then look for opportunities to actually use those models specifically to help the analyst. So I kind of alluded to it in the last statement, and that is behavior analytics. I think we've talked about this for many years. How exactly are we going to get to the point of identifying the behaviors exhibited by a device or a user that indicates that it's not the user that account was intended for, or the device has not been operating as normal, so it's an indication that either the user who is utilizing the computing platform or the application that's running on there is exhibiting behavior that's not normal with respect to the patterns in the past, and so it needs to be investigated. Then what we do is, if we can actually do this, then what we do is we challenge the criminal, right, to actually do what they want to do. In other words, monetize your environment, monetize access, whatever, navigate, compromise, all of that in a pattern that matches up with the user account's history or matches up with the device's history. And that becomes very challenging. And so, like anything else, what we're trying to do in security is to make the criminal's job more difficult. So behavior analytics, specifically user behavior analytics, are two areas where I think we can have the chance to solve these problems with ML. So from the standpoint of the questions that you could ask, so a lot of times you'll find that you have independent products which have ML models in them. So from the standpoint of these models themselves, there's questions about when you bring the product in or you're reviewing it, or you have it in place, exactly how you can utilize them. And you have to get to a few facts with respect to the product, the vendors and the product owners. And that is that you have to get them to express to you, is this supervised or is it unsupervised, right? Think of supervised as, you've determined what it is that you want it to predict. And so then you give it a set of data, right, or raw data, and then that actually produces, very specific, and I don't want to use too many technical jargon here, but there are facts associated with certain categories that that tell you if these are exhibited, that most likely it's going to be compromised or it's going to be exhibiting behaviors outside the norm. And then unsupervised is where you don't know what the answers are, what the result sets are, and it's just going to do things like clustering. It's going to put together all of the devices which are exhibiting common behaviors and put those together and then maybe illustrate which ones are not. So it's important to know which one, because you're going to have to interact with these products and think about, how can I use these models to better improve my analyst's work? So number two, what actions can I take that affect the models? So you need to get from the manufacturers exactly which actions. Is it an acknowledgement, for instance, of an event that actually feeds back into the model that then trains it? So you need to actually identify these and make sure that you actually put into your run books when you want those actions to happen, so that the models can become more effective. And then the third is, can we define the prediction needed? So look across the board. So if I say, for instance, we have a network detection device and it's trying to predict high risk or high probability that a device is compromised with malware, or that somebody is doing scanning. Take any phase within MITRE ATT&CK framework that you want, and you can actually pattern this out in an English statement. Once you do that, then you can figure out, do I have the right data that's available to the ML model? And if not, then I have to add it to it. And then if it's unsupervised, where do I see the outputs that are the result? And you need to get specific with respect to maybe the way that the tool is visualizing the events for your analyst, or maybe it's something that underlies it. So one of the things, I'll just give you one example of something that we did, which was considered non-traditional from the product owner, and that is the models. Sometimes you can actually even create new models within your product. One of them we actually took, and we knew that to predict whether something was compromised and to elevate it based on a scoring, that if we could affect that scoring, if we knew that one conclusion might be correct, and that is that if there's a endpoint security solution like a VR on there, we might lower the score that's evaluated by the security product. And when we did that, we also know that that host exhibits certain behavior when it has the endpoint security solution, EDR, on it. So if we build that into the model, and we also know that at any moment that endpoint security solution could be disabled or it could be removed. And instead of having to go through and a human analyst look at that moment in time, was it there? What version was it running? We could just have the model decide that the agent was running based on the behavior of the endpoint. And when it does that, label it during that period of time. And if it exhibits other actions which say that it's most likely compromised, that it will downgrade that because it knows the endpoint security solution is running on there. So you can think of it like an enhanced access list or asset list, sorry. And then the last one, are we able to reset the raw data associated with this model? One of the things that I think probably set us back a little bit was the way that these models that were being trained across networks and applications had to deal with the data change associated with COVID. So think about these models being built off of user behavior, and all of a sudden under COVID, the users left the office. They were working from home. A lot of the models failed at that point. The question is, to the product vendors, can we reset this? How do we reset this? Are we starting anew during COVID? Are we starting anew at some point past, past us, going back to work, basically returning to work? And is it going to be a new hybrid model where they all have to be trained? And then do we actually take into account our own company's direction with respect to whether people will be back in the office a certain number of days or whatever? So I'm just pointing out one problem that you have to actually talk with the product owners about, so that you can figure out whether you can actually modify the data sets. And then, I think one thing to bring up with them and to ask is, based on what happened with COVID, is there something that happened specifically with respect to your product that we need to take into account? Because this change in work habit might come up more often than we think, or there might be something else that changes your employee, customers' behavior, or your application's behavior. And I just want to say that last one is important, because if the device, the cybersecurity device, is actually modeling all of this, and you make a wholesale change with respect to your environment, maybe do a move from on-prem applications to the cloud, these models are not going to be as effective if they're based off of some of this activity. So these real life scenarios are some of the things that you need to have discussions with your solution providers. So with that, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Wow, Tim, thank you so much. That was amazing. And I know this virtual audience is giving you a huge virtual round of applause. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, if you have any, if you need.
For the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and take some time to check out our amazing exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.